And it was interesting to read then the Climate Change Committee report that came out for 2018, which shows that, yes, we have actually reduced our carbon emissions by 43% compared with 1990 levels, but since about 2008, the only area where there has been significant reductions in emissions is in fact in the power sector. Everywhere else, emissions have remained flat or are going slightly up. That is transport, in industry, in buildings, in agriculture, in waste, in F-gases. They've remained flat. And something like 75% of all emission reductions that have taken place since 2012 have just been in the power sector. So although the power sector is doing quite well in terms of reducing emissions, that is electricity production, then it's actually a standout. Everything else is pretty much standing still. Now that is a real worry for two reasons. Firstly, that's the only area where we appear to be making progress. But secondly, when you look at energy, energy itself is not just about power. Energy is all about, yes, generating electricity, but 80% of the energy that we use actually is not electricity. It's the things that go into heating. It's how we heat our homes, how we cook our food, how we heat our water. And that's a far greater chunk of our primary energy requirement than actually using electricity is concerned. Indeed, something like 32% of our total UK emissions actually arrive from heating buildings in the domestic environment and in industry. And then if we add to that the energy that's used in transport and the energy that's used in power, then we get the total picture. But the truth of the matter is that as far as heat is concerned, whilst, say, for example, we can say in the power sector, 25 to 30%, well, 26% at the moment, I think, is now coming directly from renewables. And indeed, just looking at I don't know whether people look at the power barometers that are around at the moment as to how much of our power is coming from renewables at any one time. Something like yesterday, I think 28% of power was coming from renewables. Nevertheless, as far as that 80% of energy is concerned that goes into heat, only 5% of heat is actually supplied from renewable sources. Vast amount of heat, and I'm not casting any aspersions on anyone here present, but I bet the vast majority of you have either got on-grid gas boilers or off-grid gas or oil heating assistance. And in fact, the vast majority of the country, one way or another, that's how we do our heating. So one of the really big tasks concerned is to get stuck into decarbonising that whole heating environment. And we are way behind in doing that, and we've actually got an enormous way to go to get that sorted out. So that's where I come to the first key policy area that we, particularly in Labour, want to concentrate on, and that is not only as far as energy is concerned, have we got to complete the decarbonisation of the power sector, and we've got to do that by 2030 or so, but we've actually got to get to a really serious level of decarbonisation of heat. And many people will say, well, how are you going to do that? Because actually we quite like our gas boilers, and we don't really think they should be ripped off the wall, and the gas heating system should be all pulled up in order to decarbonise heat. So you're not going to have a very easy time on that, are you? And what we've committed ourselves to, and let us assume we have a new Labour government reasonably soon, and obviously in terms of what's going on in the House of Commons, that could be anything from 4 years to 2 weeks. And I'm off to I'm off to the House of Commons on Monday to find out what's going to happen in the rest of the week, let alone what's going to happen in the next few years. So anything could indeed happen. But what we want to do is, by the time of the end of the fifth carbon budget, which is early 2030s, that we want to have 60% of all energy being derived from low carbon renewable sources. And what that means in practice is that virtually, because of the lag of heat, virtually all of power production needs to be renewable and low carbon at that point. Something like 85%. And indeed, the other 15%, which is not directly renewable, may come from other quasi-renewable sources in order to balance the system out. And then we're saying, at the same time, you need to have something like 45 to 50% of heat decarbonised. That's, you know, within 10, 12 years. Big challenge. And that practically means the following, as far as power production is concerned: a 7-fold increase in offshore wind. And again, government's trumpeting its achievements in offshore wind, but actually we need to, instead of going with about 1 gigawatt of new installations a year, we need to go to 3 or 4 gigawatts a year over the next period, and get to a position where we've got 50 gigawatts or more of offshore wind installed. Now, I think people may remember the other part of the equation on wind is onshore wind, which, while the government is saying it's making great strides as far as offshore is concerned, they're saying, well, forget about onshore because we've banned it. We don't like onshore wind. We're not going to give permission for onshore wind, even if anybody's got the wherewithal ready to do it. We're not going to underwrite it. They've pulled the subsidies away from onshore wind, and effectively there is no onshore wind being developed anywhere in England and Wales at the moment. Some happening in Scotland. That's mainly because of better planning arrangements in Scotland, but an effective ban across the whole of the UK, which is utterly stupid. And it's utterly stupid because onshore wind is now the cheapest form of electricity generation that you can actually install. The cost prices have come down so substantially, beginning to do so in offshore wind, has done enormously in onshore wind, that actually it outcompetes gas, it outcompetes coal, oil, all the other forms of power generation. It is now cheaper to run onshore on. So to actually not only ban your best shot as far as low carbon energy is concerned, as far as the country, but the cheapest, takes some doing in policy terms, I think. So we need to undo that ban, and we need to at least double the amount of installed onshore wind at the moment. There's quite a lot installed, about 12 gigawatts, so that needs to double over the next 10 to 15 years. And the final part of the equation is we need to treble the amount of solar PV that is installed. Now that is not just solar PV on roofs, that's a solar field PV, but let's not underestimate just how much progress we can make with domestic and small commercial installation of solar PV, particularly if we're getting into a much better position where, instead of just, as I think all of us who have solar PV will know, you've got a situation where you have a deemed amount of output and you get paid a little bit for your output, although you don't actually know what your output is. With the development of smarter metering and measurement systems, you can start deeming, you can start measuring half-hour outputs and actually start to aggregate those outputs, so that you've got in every area of the country, you've got virtual power stations now coming forward. So you know how much power is going out. You can start using that to move it about the system properly and start balancing and playing a part in that overall generation process. So trebling the amount of solar PV that goes into the system. Okay, so you say, well, what about heat? Well, we've got to do several things as far as heat is concerned. Well, firstly, we've got to start decarbonising the gas that goes into the system. So at the moment, 96–97% of gas that goes into your gas mains is high carbon gas, pure and simple North Sea gas. Marginally better than town gas previously, obviously much better than coal, but still substantially intensive fossil fuel carbon generating. So beginning to get gas injected into the system from AD plants, getting biomethane, injecting gas into the system, producing hydrogen, to put hydrogen into the gas system. It's actually not a terribly well-known fact, but when we had town gas, for those who can remember that far back, and I am one of them, then the hydrogen component of town gas was about 45%. So the ability of the gas system to absorb various forms of low carbon gas is quite considerable. We have changed all the nozzles on the boilers, so that we've had to change them back. But in general, you can actually get a lot of low carbon gas into the system and keep the system going as it is without having to do a fundamental change around. But it may well be that over the period we're going to have to move to a hydrogen heating economy as far as heating is concerned. And if we've got an entire afternoon, I can talk to you about how you make hydrogen and the problems of steam methane reformation and making it by electrolysis and what that means in terms of carbon capture and storage and various other things. We won't go into that, and I already have, unfortunately, a bit already. But nevertheless, those are the sort of options that are going to be, we're going to need to move on pretty quickly to get the heating systems decarbonised as far as the country is concerned. And alongside that, we need to develop a series of other options, because there is no silver bullet that deals with heat decarbonisation. You've got to do a lot of things. You've got to put gas into the system, you've got to start developing hydrogen, you've got to get district heating schemes in certain parts of the country going, and so in an urban environment, actually having district heating schemes which actually very efficiently heat homes at a much lower carbon costs need to be put forward. Chair was kind enough to mention one thing I did many years ago, which is in Southampton. We literally got hold of geothermal heating from 3,000 feet below the surface, drill down, get the get the geothermal heat up. Geothermal water comes to the surface at about 73 degrees. Heat exchangers then take that heat off, and in Southampton now you've got about a 20-kilometre heat network heating the whole of the city centre and all around. And that can be done in lots of parts of the country. So we could get a lot of geothermal heat coming out. Now you may say to yourself, that's not entirely renewable, but actually geothermal aquifers only deplete by about 0.5 degree per century. So it's not, strictly speaking, completely renewable, but it will do for the time being. So that's what we're going to do over the next period on our energy policies. Now, if we do all that, and at the same time, we're really heating our homes on a low carbon basis, and we're sorting out the power system, and all the heat's going into our homes, low carbon heat going into our homes, and the low carbon power is being used in our homes, and it's all going out of the walls and the ceilings straight off. We haven't actually got very much further, and one of the problems we've got is that UK housing stock is actually some of the worst insulated in Europe. And so unless we have a programme of radical uprating of the energy efficiency of our properties, then we'll have wasted a lot of the effort that we're putting into low carbon heat and low carbon power in the first place. So what needs to go along with that, and this is way beyond those schemes you hear about, the energy company's obligation where, forgive me for putting it like this, but you find a little old lady who's a bit vulnerable in terms of heating, and then the energy company runs around and offers her sort of some loft insulation and some wall cladding. I'm not decrying those particular efforts, but actually you've got to do it on an area by area basis. You've got to go back to what, again, people with long memories will remember housing action areas, housing improvement areas. You've actually got, in every town and city, you've got to start doing energy improvement areas, whereby you're going round and doing those homes on an area basis, getting them properly done, and not just getting the walls and the ceilings insulated. You've got 7.5 million or so single-skinned, non-cavity wall homes in the UK, and those have got to be externally clad to make them properly energy efficient. So what we've committed ourselves to is a programme of 4 million homes per Labour government, and I'm being optimistic here, I'm assuming that we're going to have not one but two Labour governments over a 10-year period, and that's, so 4 million in the first period and 4 million in the second period, and that gets the majority of homes insulated and certainly will enable what the Climate Change Committee has penciled in as the energy efficiency gain for carbon emissions properly put in place as far as our housing stock is concerned. And if you do that, by the way, among other things, you would, even if you continue to use gas, then you have about a 30% reduction in gas use in homes just by doing that. So it's not just something that combats fuel poverty, not just something that actually saves people bills over the period of time because their heating bills are going to be much cheaper, but actually it makes a tremendous contribution to the attack on carbon emissions as far as those homes are concerned. Now, I'm conscious I've gone on rather too long, so I'll try and shut myself up fairly soon. But I just want to touch on two other areas that we think are particularly important in this context, which I think you will agree is to be particularly important, and that is transport and agriculture, or transport and land use, should I say. Transport, basically we need to make much faster progress towards the electrification of our vehicle fleet. The government has put in a very vague suggestion that by 2040 we should stop selling fully internal combustion engine vehicles. If we do that, we'll have actually failed completely to bring the contribution that transport makes to taking carbon dioxide out of the air. As far as our policies are concerned, we'll have let those emissions carry on for 2 decades before we actually seriously tackle it. So we've got to be much earlier in terms of getting the internal combustion engine vehicle off the roads. And by that, government let out is that, well, it will be okay to have hybrids on the road. Now, you know, I'm obviously one of the guilty ones here, in as much as I drove here this morning, not in a diesel vehicle, but a hybrid. I have a hybrid car, but I fully accept that that's got to be off the road as well by the mid-30s latest. And we've got to go to pretty much an all-electric vehicle fleet. Now, I'm pleased to see I think if we take the vehicles outside as an exemplar, I think I think I counted 2 leafs outside. So we're doing better, and my hybrid. So we're doing a bit better than the country average is concerned. Right, bike?
Electric bike.
Electric bike, yeah, that's great. Yeah, right. Okay, so, but again, that underpins a task that we've got, that we've just got to get that electric vehicle fleet advanced, and that's going to make potentially, I mean, we've got to really put a lot of effort into vehicle charging infrastructure. I mean, frankly, if going back to energy is concerned, if everybody comes home of an evening and puts their electric vehicles all on charge at 6 o'clock in the evening, you blow the local system up. And so we've got to actually have much more intelligent systems of charging, which actually are going to have to be done on protocols for switching time of charge, the installation of some fast charging systems, and that can probably be done by having relatively large battery charging. When I say batteries, I mean 50 megawatt whacking great big batteries, which would be the stuff of future petrol stations, i.e. they may not be petrol stations, they'll be charging stations, and that they will have batteries taking stuff directly off the high level grid, and then you can drive your vehicle in and hopefully get your charge in about 10-15 minutes rather than overnight in Acacia Avenue. And so there has to be government intervention to get that infrastructure in, otherwise that electric vehicle structure arrangement will not work. Finally, just a word or two about land use. And one of the, I mean, there's a whole range of things that we've got to get right in terms of what the carbon emissions of agriculture are. We've actually got to obviously get pretty real about what our diet consists of over the next period. We simply can't continue a diet whereby we're putting an enormous amount of carbon and effort into feeding cows, frankly, which then feed us. But one thing we can immediately do, which may not strike you as particularly relevant in this part of the world, but is relevant across most of the UK, and that is that we have at the moment got a tree cover of just 11% across this country. And in truth, that although we may think piles of trees, piles of forests, actually we're actually living in a country that's just got the remnants of the afforestation that used to be the case as far as the UK is concerned. And it so happens that mature tree cover is the best carbon sink you can get.